The moment you decide someone doesn't belong is often the moment your own future begins to fall apart. The breakfast crowd inside Harper's Diner had barely settled into the familiar rhythm of clinking coffee mugs, sizzling bacon, and quiet conversations when the front door swung open with the sharp ring of a brass bell. Outside, the spring sun painted the sidewalks of Cedar Falls, Georgia, in soft golden light, while pickup trucks and family sedans rolled lazily past the row of small businesses that had served the town for generations. Inside, nothing seemed unusual. A retired couple shared pancakes near the window. A waitress balanced 3 steaming plates with practiced confidence. College students laughed over textbooks, and a young father helped his daughter color on the back of a paper menu. At the far corner booth sat a man who blended into the ordinary morning so completely that no one gave him a second glance. He wore faded blue jeans, a dark brown jacket, and a simple baseball cap resting beside his untouched cup of black coffee. His expression carried the quiet patience of someone accustomed to listening more than speaking. Every few moments he glanced around the room, smiling politely whenever someone accidentally met his eyes. His name was Terrence Coleman, though not a single person inside the diner seemed to recognize the face that had appeared on television screens across the country countless times. He preferred it that way. As one of the youngest black senators to earn national respect for bipartisan leadership, Terrence believed that the only honest way to understand ordinary Americans was to spend time among them without cameras, without staff members, and without the invisible wall created by public office. For years, he had quietly visited diners, churches, barbershops, and neighborhood grocery stores across his home state, collecting stories that statistics could never tell. This morning was supposed to be another one of those quiet visits. But fate often arrives disguised as routine. Less than 30 seconds after Terrence stirred a packet of sugar into his coffee, another customer entered the diner wearing a neatly pressed police uniform. Officer Nathan Sullivan carried himself with the confidence that came from believing his badge answered every question before it was ever asked. His polished boots echoed across the tiled floor as conversations gradually softened. The waitress greeted him by name. Several regulars nodded respectfully. Nathan acknowledged them with brief smiles before his attention drifted across the room. Then he saw Terrence. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. It wasn't recognition. It was assumption. A silent judgment formed long before a single word was exchanged. He studied the senator from across the diner, as though the simple act of sitting quietly over breakfast somehow demanded explanation. Terrence noticed the lingering stare, but calmly returned to reading handwritten notes inside a small leather notebook. Years in public life had taught him that dignity often begins with refusing to react to suspicion. Around them, no one sensed the invisible tension beginning to spread through the room. The coffee continued pouring. Plates continued arriving. Children continued laughing. Yet something in the atmosphere had shifted. Imagine enjoying an ordinary breakfast without realizing that within minutes your name would dominate headlines across America. Not because of something you had done, but because of what someone else believed the moment they looked at you. Terrence Coleman had learned long ago that the most revealing conversations rarely happened beneath the marble ceilings of government buildings. They happened across scratched wooden tables, over warm coffee poured without ceremony, and inside places where people believed nobody important was listening. That was why he insisted on traveling without a large security detail whenever state regulations allowed it. His senior staff often argued that it was too risky, that a United States senator should never appear alone in public, but Terrence always answered the same way. If every handshake was scheduled and every conversation filtered through staff members, then the voices that needed to be heard the most would remain silent forever. Harper's Diner had become one of his favorite stops during those quiet trips. Through northern Georgia, the owner, Martha Jenkins, knew him simply as Mr. Coleman, a polite customer who always arrived early, ordered black coffee with eggs and whole wheat toast, tipped generously, and treated every employee with genuine respect. She had never asked what he did for a living. He had never volunteered the answer. That simple understanding allowed both of them to enjoy something increasingly rare in modern America, an ordinary conversation without expectations. This morning, Terrence had spent nearly 20 minutes listening to Martha describe how rising grocery prices were affecting local families. He carefully wrote several notes inside the leather notebook resting beside his plate. Every page contained real stories gathered from real people. No speechwriter had polished these words. No political consultant had selected them. They belonged to truck drivers worried about fuel costs, teachers buying classroom supplies with their own paychecks, veterans navigating long waits for medical appointments, and small business owners struggling to keep their lights on. Those stories mattered more to Terrence than any opinion poll ever could. Across the dining room, however, Officer Nathan Sullivan was building a very different story inside his own mind. From where he stood near the entrance, he watched Terrence with increasing suspicion. The notebook looked unusual to him. The repeated glances around the restaurant appeared calculated rather than thoughtful. Every ordinary action seemed to reinforce an assumption that had already taken root before evidence had even entered the picture. Nathan convinced himself that something did not fit, even though nothing before him actually suggested wrongdoing. Sometimes the most dangerous conclusions are the ones reached without a single question being asked. One of the younger waitresses approached Terrence, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. He thanked her with the same warm smile he offered everyone, asking whether her college classes were going well after remembering a conversation from months earlier. Her face brightened with surprise that he had remembered such a small detail. She proudly explained that she had just completed her first semester with honors. Terrence congratulated her sincerely, telling her that perseverance often opened doors talent alone could not. Several nearby customers smiled quietly at the exchange. Kindness has a way of softening an entire room. Yet from across the diner, Nathan interpreted the conversation differently. Familiarity became suspicious. Confidence became arrogance. Calmness became concealment. The quiet atmosphere that had welcomed another peaceful morning now carried an invisible weight. Outside, the wind gently stirred the American flag hanging above the front porch, while inside Harper's Diner, two men from entirely different worlds sat only a few yards apart, each unaware that the next decision would transform an ordinary breakfast into a story that people across the nation would soon be unable to forget. Officer Nathan Sullivan remained near the entrance for several long seconds, pretending to study the breakfast menu posted beside the register, while his attention never truly left Terrence Coleman. The longer he watched, the more convinced he became that something about the quiet customer deserved investigation. It was not based on evidence. It was not based on a report from dispatch or a complaint from anyone inside the diner. It was simply a feeling that had grown stronger inside his own mind until it began to resemble certainty. Human beings often mistake confidence for truth, and that mistake can change lives in ways nobody expects. Nathan finally stepped away from the counter and walked slowly across the checkered floor. His polished boots echoed just enough to draw the attention of several nearby customers. Conversations gradually softened. The waitress carrying a tray of fresh biscuits paused for only a moment before continuing toward another table. Terrence calmly closed his notebook as the officer approached, lifting his eyes with the relaxed expression of someone prepared for an ordinary conversation rather than a confrontation. He greeted Nathan with a polite smile. "Good morning, officer." His voice was calm, respectful, and completely free of tension. Nathan did not return the greeting. Instead, he studied Terrence with a measured stare before asking, "What brings you here today?" The question sounded simple enough, yet something about its tone caused several customers to glance toward the corner booth. Terrence answered without hesitation. "Just breakfast and a chance to hear how people in the community are doing." Nathan's eyes shifted toward the notebook resting beside the coffee cup. "What are you writing down?" Terrence looked briefly at the leather cover before responding. "Thoughts, conversations, things people tell me that deserve to be remembered." Nathan frowned slightly. "Mind showing me some identification?" The request hung in the air for a brief moment. Terrence did not argue. He slowly reached inside his jacket pocket and removed a leather wallet containing several identification cards. Years of public service had taught him that cooperation often prevented misunderstandings from growing larger than necessary. He placed the wallet gently on the table instead of handing it over abruptly, careful not to create unnecessary discomfort. Nathan opened it and examined the contents with narrowed eyes. His expression did not soften. If anything, it became even more skeptical. The photograph matched the man sitting before him, yet Nathan seemed unwilling to accept what he was reading. Around the diner, curious eyes followed every movement. Martha Jenkins quietly stepped from behind the register, sensing that the atmosphere had changed. She had known Terrence as a courteous customer for years and could not remember a single moment when he had caused even the smallest disturbance. A retired school principal seated nearby leaned slightly toward his wife and whispered that something felt wrong. Terrence noticed the growing attention and offered everyone around him the same reassuring smile he had worn since entering the diner nearly half an hour earlier. There was no anger in his face, no panique, only quiet patience. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked gently. Nathan closed the wallet and looked directly into Terrence's eyes. "That depends on whether you are telling me the truth." The words settled over the room like an unexpected storm cloud. Even the sound of silverware against ceramic plates seemed to disappear. Outside, cars continued passing beneath the bright Georgia sunshine as though nothing unusual was happening. Inside Harper's Diner, however, every heartbeat seemed to slow as ordinary breakfast conversations gave way to silent anticipation, and no one could have imagined how quickly one assumption was about to place an entire career on the edge of collapse. Terrence Coleman held Nathan Sullivan's gaze without the slightest hint of hostility. He had spent decades navigating difficult conversations in committee rooms, town halls, and neighborhoods where emotions often ran high, and he understood that losing composure rarely changed another person's mind. Calmness, however, sometimes revealed far more than anger ever could. "Everything in that wallet is current," Terrence said evenly. "If you need verification, I will gladly wait while you make the necessary calls." Nathan barely acknowledged the suggestion. Instead, he looked once more at the identification card before sliding it back across the table with visible skepticism. "Anyone can carry a card," he replied. "That does not automatically make it legitimate." Several customers exchanged uneasy glances. Martha Jenkins stepped closer, wiping her hands on her apron before speaking carefully. "Officer Sullivan, Mr. Coleman has been coming here for years. He has never caused any trouble. He is one of the most respectful people who walks through that door." Nathan turned toward her without changing his expression. "Ma'am, I appreciate your opinion, but I am responsible for determining whether everything here checks out." Martha nodded politely, though concern remained written across her face. Terrence quietly folded his notebook closed and rested both hands on the table where everyone could see them. "Officer," he said with the same measured tone, "I have no intention of making your job more difficult. If there is a misunderstanding, I am confident we can resolve it." For just a moment, it seemed those words might ease the growing tension. Instead, Nathan interpreted the senator's confidence as further reason to doubt him. In his mind, cooperation no longer appeared genuine. It looked rehearsed. The invisible story he had constructed continued to grow stronger than the facts sitting directly in front of him. A young couple seated near the entrance stopped eating altogether. One quietly reached for a cell phone but hesitated, uncertain whether recording was appropriate. An elderly veteran lowered his newspaper, watching silently over the top of his glasses. Even the cooks behind the serving window slowed their movements as whispers spread through the diner. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past without anyone inside noticing. Nathan took one step closer to the booth. "Please stand up," he instructed. Terrence did not argue. He slowly rose from his seat, buttoned his jacket, and remained completely still. "Is there a specific concern you would like me to address?" he asked. Nathan answered only with another request. "Place your hands where I can clearly see them." Terrence calmly complied, keeping his movements deliberate and unhurried. Every eye inside Harper's Diner now rested on the two men. The cheerful sounds that had filled the restaurant only minutes earlier had been replaced by a silence so complete that the gentle hum of the ceiling fan seemed unusually loud. Martha opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something else, but stopped herself. She sensed that interrupting now might only make the situation worse. Nathan removed a pair of handcuffs from his duty belt, his expression unchanged. Terrence looked briefly at the polished metal, then back at the officer. "I hope you are certain this is necessary," he said quietly. Nathan responded with complete confidence. "I know exactly what I am doing." Within seconds, the handcuffs were secured according to procedure, leaving customers throughout the diner frozen in disbelief. A few gasps broke the silence. Someone near the back finally began recording with a cell phone. Terrence remained remarkably composed, offering no resistance and no raised voice, only a calm expression that seemed almost impossible under the circumstances. Unknown to everyone in the room, hundreds of miles away inside the state capitol, a missed call had just appeared on the screen of a senior legislative aide who never ignored messages from Senator Terrence Coleman. The quiet disbelief inside Harper's diner lingered like a storm that refused to move on. No one shouted. No one rushed toward the officer. Instead, people simply watched, struggling to understand how an ordinary breakfast had transformed into a scene that felt increasingly difficult to explain. Terrence Coleman remained standing beside his booth, his wrists restrained, yet his posture never changed. His shoulders stayed relaxed. His breathing remained steady. He looked less concerned about his own situation than about the growing discomfort spreading across the faces of everyone around him. Martha Jenkins slowly approached, stopping several feet away before speaking with careful respect. "Officer Sullivan, I have owned this diner for 28 years. Mr. Coleman has never once given me a reason to question his character. Please, there has to be another way to clear this up." Nathan Sullivan glanced toward her only briefly. "Ma'am, I am following my judgment based on the circumstances in front of me." Martha lowered her voice. "But what circumstances?" "He came in, ordered breakfast, talked with my staff, and wrote in his notebook like he always does." Nathan answered without hesitation. "Sometimes people work very hard to appear ordinary." Those words settled heavily across the room. Several customers exchanged uncertain looks. A retired teacher quietly shook her head, while a delivery driver, standing near the register, folded his arms in visible concern. The young woman Terrence had encouraged about college only minutes earlier stood frozen beside the coffee station. Unable to believe the same kind customer who remembered her academic achievements was now being treated as though he posed some unknown threat. Terrence finally broke the silence with the same calm voice he had maintained from the beginning. "Officer, I understand that public safety is important. I respect the responsibility you carry every day, but assumptions are not the same as facts. I hope we can remember that before this goes any further." Nathan did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked around the diner and noticed several cell phones quietly recording. Rather than reconsidering his decision, he seemed to become even more determined to defend it. Pride has a remarkable ability to drown out doubt once an audience begins to watch. Meanwhile, nearly 100 miles away in Atlanta, Terrence's senior legislative aide, Rebecca Lawson, stared at her phone with growing concern. Senator Coleman never ignored scheduled briefing calls, especially on mornings when committee meetings were approaching. She dialed his number again. The call connected, but instead of hearing the senator answer, she heard distant voices, the faint clatter of dishes, and someone politely asking another customer to step aside. Rebecca frowned. Something was clearly wrong. She immediately opened the senator's travel itinerary and located the small diner listed between two community meetings. Without wasting another second, she called the regional office assigned to coordinate the senator's visits. Within moments, another staff member confirmed that no security alerts had been reported, making the unanswered call even more unusual. Back inside Harper's diner, Terrence quietly looked toward the front windows where sunlight continued pouring across the parking lot. The morning remained beautiful beyond the glass. Families continued arriving at nearby stores. Children laughed while climbing out of minivans. Life outside, moved forward completely unaware that inside the little diner, a single decision based on perception rather than verification was already beginning to travel far beyond Cedar Falls. And although Nathan Sullivan believed he was firmly in control of the situation, events had already started moving in a direction that neither his badge nor his confidence would be able to stop. Rebecca Lawson did not believe in coincidence, especially when it involved Senator Terrence Coleman. During the 7 years she had served as his chief legislative aide, he had never missed 2 scheduled calls in a row without leaving a message. He respected people's time too much for that. As she listened once more to the open phone line, filled with muffled voices and the distant sounds of dishes being cleared, instinct told her that something had interrupted an otherwise ordinary morning. She immediately contacted the regional field office. Within less than 3 minutes, another staff member confirmed Terrence's location through his travel itinerary and began calling businesses near Harper's Diner. The first 2 calls went unanswered. The third reached a neighboring pharmacy, whose manager glanced through the front window and noticed several police vehicles outside the restaurant. That single observation changed everything. Rebecca thanked him, ended the call, and immediately contacted the Georgia State Patrol liaison assigned to legislative security. Senator Coleman appears to be involved in an unexpected law enforcement encounter, she explained calmly. I need verification immediately. The request triggered a chain of notifications that moved quietly but remarkably fast through state offices. Meanwhile, inside Harper's Diner, the atmosphere remained tense but controlled. Terrence stood patiently beside his booth, speaking only when someone addressed him directly. One elderly customer quietly offered to call an attorney. Terrence smiled appreciatively before shaking his head. "Thank you," he replied. "Right now, I would rather everyone remain calm. We do not solve misunderstandings by creating larger ones." His steady voice seemed to lower the anxiety filling the room. Even those recording with their cell phones noticed that the senator refused to match suspicion with hostility. Nathan Sullivan interpreted that composure differently. The absence of panic only reinforced his belief that the man standing before him had practiced remaining calm under pressure. "Someone from the department will verify everything soon enough," Nathan said confidently, more to reassure himself than anyone else. Terrence nodded politely. "I welcome that." Martha Jenkins quietly walked behind the counter and reached beneath the register. She removed an old photo album she occasionally showed longtime customers. Flipping through several pages, she found a newspaper clipping from a local charity breakfast held nearly 4 years earlier. There, standing beside firefighters, teachers, and community volunteers, was Terrence Coleman wearing the same warm smile she had come to know. Before she could carry the clipping toward Nathan, the front door opened again. A young man in business attire hurried inside, breathing heavily after jogging across the parking lot from his rental car. "Excuse me," he called respectfully. "Has anyone seen Senator Coleman?" Every head in the diner turned toward him. Nathan stepped forward before anyone else could answer. "Who are you?" The newcomer reached into his jacket and presented an official identification badge. "My name is Andrew Mitchell. I work in Senator Coleman's district office. We lost contact with him 20 minutes ago." Nathan studied the credentials without speaking. Andrew looked past the officer and immediately spotted Terrence, standing quietly beside the booth. Relief crossed his face for only an instant before confusion replaced it. "Senator," he said, his voice filled with disbelief, "we have been trying to reach you everywhere." The room fell perfectly silent. Nathan slowly turned toward Terrence, as though hearing the title for the very first time. Yet before anyone could process what had just been said, the radio attached to Nathan's shoulder crackled sharply to life. Dispatch requested immediate contact with Police Chief Harold Bennett, adding only 6 words that caused every experienced officer to pay attention. Priority call from the governor's office. Rebecca Lawson did not believe in coincidence, especially when it involved Senator Terrence Coleman. During the 7 years she had served as his chief legislative aide, he had never missed 2 scheduled calls in a row without leaving a message. He respected people's time too much for that. As she listened once more to the open phone line filled with muffled voices and the distant sounds of dishes being cleared, Instinct told her that something had interrupted an otherwise ordinary morning. She immediately contacted the regional field office. Within less than 3 minutes, another staff member confirmed Terrence's location through his travel itinerary and began calling businesses near Harper's Diner. The first 2 calls went unanswered. The third reached a neighboring pharmacy, whose manager glanced through the front window and noticed several police vehicles outside the restaurant. That single observation changed everything. Rebecca thanked him, ended the call, and immediately contacted the Georgia State Patrol liaison assigned to legislative security. Senator Coleman appears to be involved in an unexpected law enforcement encounter, she explained calmly. I need verification immediately. The request triggered a chain of notifications that moved quietly but remarkably fast through state offices. Meanwhile, inside Harper's Diner, the atmosphere remained tense but controlled. Terrence stood patiently beside his booth, speaking only when someone addressed him directly. One elderly customer quietly offered to call an attorney. Terrence smiled appreciatively before shaking his head. Thank you, he replied. Right now, I would rather everyone remain calm. We do not solve misunderstandings by creating larger ones. His steady voice seemed to lower the anxiety filling the room. Even those recording with their cell phones noticed that the senator refused to match suspicion with hostility. Nathan Sullivan interpreted that composure differently. The absence of panic only reinforced his belief that the man standing before him had practiced remaining calm under pressure. Someone from the department will verify everything soon enough, Nathan said confidently, more to reassure himself than anyone else. Terrence nodded politely. I welcome that. Martha Jenkins quietly walked behind the counter and reached beneath the register. She removed an old photo album she occasionally showed longtime customers. Flipping through several pages, she found a newspaper clipping from a local charity breakfast held nearly 4 years earlier. There, standing beside firefighters, teachers, and community volunteers, was Terrence Coleman wearing the same warm smile she had come to know. Before she could carry the clipping toward Nathan, the front door opened again. A young man in business attire hurried inside, breathing heavily after jogging across the parking lot from his rental car. Excuse me, he called respectfully. Has anyone seen Senator Coleman? Every head in the diner turned toward him. Nathan stepped forward before anyone else could answer. Who are you? The newcomer reached into his jacket and presented an official identification badge. My name is Andrew Mitchell. I work in Senator Coleman's district office. We lost contact with him 20 minutes ago. Nathan studied the credentials without speaking. Andrew looked past the officer and immediately spotted Terrence standing quietly beside the booth. Relief crossed his face for only an instant before confusion replaced it. Senator, he said, his voice filled with disbelief, we have been trying to reach you everywhere. The room fell perfectly silent. Nathan slowly turned toward Terrence, as though hearing the title for the very first time. Yet before anyone could process what had just been said, the radio attached to Nathan's shoulder crackled sharply to life. Dispatch requested immediate contact with Police Chief Harold Bennett, adding only 6 words that caused every experienced officer to pay attention. Priority call from the governor's office. Police Chief Harold Bennett arrived less than 4 minutes later, his unmarked department vehicle pulling into the parking lot with quiet urgency rather than flashing lights. Years of experience had taught him that the loudest response was not always the wisest one. As he stepped through the front door of Harper's Diner, the silence inside immediately told him this was no ordinary call. Every customer looked toward him with the same uneasy expectation. Officer Nathan Sullivan stood near the center of the dining room, still convinced that procedure would ultimately justify every decision he had made. Terrence Coleman remained composed beside the booth where his breakfast had gone cold, while Andrew Mitchell waited nearby with visible concern. Chief Bennett quickly took in the entire scene before his eyes settled on the restraints. His expression tightened ever so slightly. Officer Sullivan, he said in a calm but unmistakably serious voice, meet me over here. Nathan walked over confidently. Chief, I have the situation under control. There were inconsistencies that required investigation. Before the chief could respond, the phone clipped to his belt began vibrating. The screen displayed only a secure government number, but Bennett immediately recognized it. Without hesitation, he answered, "Chief Harold Bennett speaking." The entire diner seemed to stop breathing. Bennett listened without interrupting. His posture gradually changed from professional confidence to quiet disbelief. "Yes, Governor," he replied after several long seconds. "I understand." No one could hear the voice on the other end, yet the weight of the conversation filled the room. Bennett glanced toward Terrence before speaking again. "Yes, sir. Senator Coleman is here. He is safe." Another pause followed. Bennett's shoulders lowered slightly. "I understand completely. It will be handled immediately." The call ended. For a brief moment, the chief remained perfectly still, staring at the dark phone screen as though replaying every word he had just heard. Then he slowly looked toward Nathan Sullivan. The confidence that had surrounded the younger officer only minutes earlier began fading as he searched the chief's face for reassurance and found none. Bennett walked directly to Terrence. His voice carried genuine respect. "Senator Coleman, on behalf of this department, I sincerely apologize for what has happened this morning." Terrence offered a calm nod. "Chief, I appreciate you coming personally." Bennett carefully removed the restraints, treating the moment with the dignity it deserved. No applause followed. No one celebrated. The silence itself carried more weight than any words could have. Nathan stared at the floor, his thoughts racing faster than his expression revealed. The newspaper clipping Martha Jenkins, still held in her hands, suddenly made perfect sense. Andrew Mitchell quietly exhaled for what felt like the first time since entering the diner. Several customers slowly lowered their cell phones, realizing they had just witnessed a moment none of them would ever forget. Chief Bennett then turned back toward Nathan. His voice remained controlled, but every syllable carried unmistakable authority. "Officer Sullivan, effective immediately, you are relieved of duty pending a full internal investigation. Please surrender your department credentials and remain available for administrative review." Nathan opened his mouth as though searching for an explanation, but none came. For the first time that morning, certainty had disappeared from his face. Terrence watched quietly, showing neither satisfaction nor anger. He simply looked at the young officer with the same steady expression he had worn since the first question had been asked. Sometimes the greatest lesson does not come from humiliation. It comes from realizing that respect should have been offered long before anyone learned a person's title. News travels faster than anyone expects when ordinary people witness something extraordinary. Before Chief Harold Bennett and Senator Terrence Coleman had even finished speaking, short video clips recorded inside Harper's Diner had already begun appearing across social media. Customers who had quietly documented the morning uploaded only what they had personally seen, and within minutes thousands of viewers were asking the same question. How could something like this happen to a man who had remained respectful from beginning to end? Television producers in Atlanta contacted local reporters. State officials requested incident summaries. The department's Internal Affairs Division confirmed that a formal administrative review had already been opened. Yet inside the diner itself, none of those developments seemed as important as the people standing face to face. Nathan Sullivan slowly removed his department credentials and handed them to Chief Bennett without speaking. The weight of the moment settled heavily upon him. Only now, after the assumptions had unraveled one by one, did he begin replaying every decision he had made that morning. He remembered the notebook, the polite greeting, the calm answers, the repeated offers to verify everything peacefully. Every opportunity to slow down had been there from the beginning. He simply had not taken it. Terrence watched quietly before stepping forward. Several customers expected anger. Others expected a harsh public rebuke. Instead, the senator spoke with the same measured voice that had remained unchanged throughout the entire ordeal. "Officer Sullivan," he said gently, "public trust is one of the hardest things to earn and one of the easiest things to lose. Every person you meet deserves the chance to be judged by their actions rather than assumptions. That principle protects all of us." Nathan finally looked up. For the first time since entering the diner, Certainty had been replaced by reflection. He gave a small nod, unable to find words that felt sufficient. Chief Bennett then addressed everyone gathered inside the restaurant. He thanked the customers for remaining calm and confirmed that the department would fully review every decision made that morning. He also reminded everyone that accountability strengthened public confidence rather than weakening it. Martha Jenkins quietly returned Terrence's breakfast to the kitchen, insisting that a fresh meal would be prepared. The senator smiled warmly. "Only if everyone else finishes theirs first," he replied, drawing soft laughter that gently lifted the tension lingering in the room. The young college student Terrence had encouraged earlier approached his table once more. "Senator," she said, "thank you for staying calm." Terrence smiled kindly. "The goal is never to win an argument. The goal is to leave enough room for truth to be heard." Those simple words stayed with everyone who heard them. Outside, more reporters began arriving, but Terrence declined every immediate interview. He explained that the people inside the diner deserved privacy after an unexpectedly difficult morning. Instead of stepping in front of cameras, he sat back down at the same booth where the day had begun, accepted a fresh cup of coffee, and resumed writing inside his leather notebook. This time, however, the page held a new reminder. Leadership is tested most clearly when respect is offered even after it has not been received. Across the room, Nathan quietly walked toward the exit beside Chief Bennett, no longer carrying the confidence that had entered with him earlier that morning, but carrying something that might one day prove far more valuable. A painful understanding that the first impression formed by prejudice can never equal the truth discovered through patience. The weeks that followed transformed Harper's Diner from an ordinary roadside restaurant into an unexpected symbol of a conversation that reached far beyond Cedar Falls. People traveled from neighboring towns simply to sit in the same booths where they had watched an ordinary morning become an unforgettable lesson about dignity, responsibility, and the importance of refusing to judge another person before knowing the truth. Martha Jenkins placed no special signs on the walls and accepted no offers to turn the diner into a tourist attraction. She believed the story belonged not to a building, but to the people willing to learn from it. Senator Terrence Coleman returned several months later without cameras, without reporters, and without any public announcement. He ordered the same breakfast, greeted the staff by name, and quietly asked the young college student whether she had completed another successful semester. She smiled proudly and told him she had earned a scholarship that would allow her to finish her degree without taking a second job. Terrence congratulated her just as warmly as he had before, proving that genuine character does not change after public attention fades away. Meanwhile, the police department completed its internal review and announced new training focused on professional communication, verification procedures, and recognizing the dangers of allowing assumptions to replace objective judgment. Chief Harold Bennett personally introduced those reforms, reminding every officer that authority carried its greatest value when exercised with patience, humility, and fairness. Nathan Sullivan remained away from active duty throughout the investigation. During that time, he attended every required program and accepted responsibility for the choices that had placed both his career and the department's reputation in jeopardy. He never publicly blamed anyone else, never claimed to be the victim, and never argued that the consequences were unfair. Instead, he quietly acknowledged that confidence without careful reflection can become a dangerous substitute for good judgment. For Terrence, the experience reinforced a belief he had carried throughout his years of public service. At his next community meeting, he spoke not about personal embarrassment, but about building stronger trust between citizens and those sworn to protect them. He reminded the audience that accountability and respect were never opposing ideas. They strengthened one another when practiced honestly. Many people expected him to speak with resentment. Instead, he chose hope. He believed communities became stronger not by pretending mistakes never happened, but by learning enough from them to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. Long after television cameras moved on and headlines disappeared, customers inside Harper's Diner still remembered the unusual silence that had filled the room that morning. They remembered how quickly assumptions had spread, how calmly one man had responded, and how a single phone call had forced everyone to confront the difference between appearance and reality. Some lessons arrive through success. Others arrive through uncomfortable truth. The people who witnessed that morning carried both with them. And perhaps the most important lesson of all was never about a senator, a police officer, or even a governor. It was about a choice every person makes each day. Respect someone before you know their title, because titles may reveal influence, but character is revealed long before introductions are ever made. The strongest badge is integrity. The highest office is humility. And real justice begins the moment every person is given the dignity they deserve from the very first hello. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of justice.